I can already see what's happening here in the sense that Sam Seder probably agrees with this guy a lot more than he thinks he does, but there's already been a kind of like negative storm around Ezra Klein. Sam just like, he can't cede ground to this person now, really, like not because the guy's not left enough.
Like all of this handcuffing comes from a place, and it's either moneyed interests or it's not. And I have no doubt that at different times.
This is where I think you've really oversimplified politics.
Oh.
I want to try to find the right example.
That phrase was very, was very absolutist, but okay. Don't you come to Scotland unless you're going to come as a construction worker, okay? And with a huge, and the only luggage you bring is bricks to build more houses, because I don't want you guys inflating my stuff. Get out of me country. Ezra Klein Sam Seder. What do they even talk about? Abundance agenda. I don't even know the background of this, so it's good to just learn about it from the clashing of the minds, really. Let's go. Your audio is awful. Start the stream already. Oh my God. You guys are impossible. You guys are absolutely disgusting. What am I supposed to do with this behavior? Okay. We're going to watch Sam Seder. So I don't really know much about this apart from that Ezra Klein wrote a book called Abundance, and I think lefties and whatever else have a big problem with it. Maybe it's like a shit lib thing. I don't know. We'll see.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. It's a pleasure to welcome. I back, I guess. I mean, maybe it was years and years ago.
Been a minute.
Ezra Klein, New York Times columnist, host of the podcast, The Ezra Klein Show, also co-author of the new book, Abundance. Ezra, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Thematically, what is the book about?
The book is about a very simple question, which is, what do we need more of and how do we get it? And then the parts of the book that I think have aroused more controversy, critique, energy, conversation, is that much of the book is exploring the question of why in the places Democrats govern, or in the times when Democrats govern, are liberals, are Democrats, are in some cases people on the left, unable to produce more of the things we need. Why is there so little housing in California and New York? Sam, where are you? Just so I have you
in New York.
You're in New York. So why in places like New York and California and Illinois, where you have a lot of Democratic control, have they become very unaffordable? Why is it very hard to cite enough clean energy, even though that's become a major project for the Democratic Party? Why is so much that we do so goddamn slow? Medicare released its Medicare cards a year after it was passed into law. Getting prescription drug prices negotiated on 10 drugs took 3 years and will only go into effect this year, just in time for Donald Trump to take advantage of it and brag that it was him who did it. So this question of the sclerosis of liberal government, how do we actually make it deliver the things it is promising to deliver, is the core inquiry of the book.
And the culprits run across, I guess, like four sort of main silos, as far as I can tell.
Like
we have the regulation and bureaucratic red tape, and this is
just ran away from me. Okay.
Problem both in terms of like
he's
building infrastructure and to some extent within the context of housing. There are that housing is also addressed by like local, I guess, incumbent
this is a really tight spot, isn't it?
Groups that have power there. The infrastructure, again, some of that bureaucratic process is a function, and we'll get into this, is a function of environmental regulations that end up getting abused in some fashion. And then in the context of like of science and innovation, it is a sort of a risk-averse funding. But let me, before we go into some of the specifics, from your perspective, because I've been reading a lot of there's a lot of reviews of the book out there. It's also
have you read the book?
I have. Well, I've listened to the book. Let's put it that way.
That's as good.
And to me, I like your read better than Derek's. Okay, but I've listened to both.
Exactly, I listened to. All right, if you that just gives you a sense of at what level we're talking.
That's a different critique. But Yes, I have read the book, and I've also read there's a tremendous amount of reviews about the book.
What is your critique of the book? I want to answer your critique of the book.
Well, I will get to that. Okay. I will get to that. But from your perspective, is this a policy or a political book?
Oh, I don't think you can separate those two.
Okay,
I mean, so you know my career. I'm a policy reporter from way back, but I think something that has always been central to the way I understand that is policy, politics, and process. And I think this is very much a book about process and proceduralism are all intertwined. The idea that you can peel them apart, that you can say, oh, this bucket is policy, this bucket is politics, is not at all how I look at that question.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, we'll start with the policy side first. But broadly, my critique is
witch doctor.
There seems to be an absence.
Oh my God.
I think the culprits that you have chosen in some instances are correct, but broadly speaking, there's an absence of analysis of power dynamics.
Okay.
I think that and the interplay of money and politics, or I should say power in our society, I think is problematic. I mean, I think that, look, there have been questions about specific policies and assumptions. I've read critiques about your assessment of why China is able to do certain things and whatnot. But and I also think the power questions really filter through a lot of what you perceive to be problematic. And then I think broadly, I think it's also difficult to understand how this is going to function as a political question. But we will get to all of that.
Second. We'll do the second in a minute.
But let's do the policy.
Let me talk about power. I have been interested to see this critique develop. And I just had Zephyr teach out on my show. There's an episode with her and Shoikat Chakrabarti called Running to the Left that I think people would be interested to hear sort of do the power debate at some length. I think this has been very revealing to me about what my friends on the left, and I think of myself usually as on the left, though, liberal, not a leftist, I guess, mean when they say power. I think this is a book entirely about power. But it is a book that treats power highly situationally. So there is a structure of power that arranges itself around, say, a housing development in San Francisco. That is a different structure of power than arranges itself around the question of can you build interstate transmission lines, which is a different structure of power than arranges itself around the question of can you site rural broadband and build that in the way that you want to, which is a different structure of power than you see in a bunch of the other cases in the book. And one thing we are attempting to do over and over and over again is get extremely granular about what is happening. So one thing that bothers me about the power analysis that I hear on the left, let's take housing, because I always think it's very important to ground things in like a specific case. Texas builds more housing than California. It builds more housing than New York. When people move to Austin and Houston and Dallas, they build homes. When people move to San Jose and San Francisco and Los Angeles, they don't. Is your view, do you find it a credible view to say that the issue is Texas has solved the corporate power problem, but California is permeable to corporate power and dominated by oligarchy in a way that Texas, or for that matter, Florida, is not?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily, I think it's not necessarily corporate power. I think what we're talking about is money. I think we're just talking about money. And
so Texas has solved the money in politics problem, but California does not.
Well, I can tell you that, like, if you want to compare, let's say, San Francisco to Houston, right? You just have a lot more space in Houston. You have a lot more money in San Francisco. And so the power that rests with the money is more concentrated, literally, right? And has the ability in those instances to stop this housing project or that housing project. Like, look at Austin, for instance. You bring up Austin. In the course of Austin, and this was, I read this in the review, because obviously I'm not studying Austin or San Francisco for that matter. But Joe Wiesenthal wrote, that his observation about Austin was that it was cheap, and then it got very expensive.
Yeah.
Then there was, and it was a function of costs went up, rents went up. It became expensive there.
Rents have gone down in Austin because they built so much.
They built so much.
I really want to hold on what you said.
Okay, so that's kind of contradictory. When I was in Austin, we were staying maybe about, I think the walk was, you went up this really long road from the hotel, and then it took you onto another really long road that led right onto the bridge where all the bats are that go into the city. And that really long road had, that's where you had all the shops and the little trailers that had little small businesses in them. But the houses in that little area, just probably like a mile and a half outside of the city, maybe even less, they were all like overgrown to in the front gardens, and the houses themselves were all like caked in graffiti, like just artsy stuff, like anime art and psychedelic art just all over the entire houses. I was like, what the is happening here? They looked like really cheaply built. But I don't know if it's just like where a bunch of artists just bought houses and decided to turn it into like a commune or something like that. It's just a very strange little environment. Yeah, I was really fascinated by that when I went there, because you never see anything like that where I am. Keep it weird. Yeah, I remember that slogan. Okay.
I said the first time.
But
San Francisco has concentrated money in a way that
there was no change in the building codes, for instance. Like the argument that
the building code responded in Austin. So you can just go look. I don't know if you guys are able to pull up data on the show and show it, but just go pull it up if we can. You can search Fred housing starts in Austin and San Francisco. You could just do this in general. You can look at this analysis across blue and red cities.
But
what the difference? Let me just. I want to go through this example, but we can go through a bunch of them. Houston doesn't have a zoning code. That's why it's easier to build there. I mean, I was talking to a developer there, and he said, look, the thing everybody knows about Houston, if you're a developer, is it's a bad place to be a homeowner. It's a good place to be a developer. And this is what I mean when I say the whole book, in a way, is about power. That in these procedural questions, in this question of how do you get housing approved, what we have created in many blue cities is a lot of veto points. And that veto point can be used by corporate power. It can be used by moneyed interests. It can be used by local homeowners who are not power in the way we would normally think of them, but sure as hell are power when you're thinking about whether or not to build housing. It can be used by all sorts of players. And so I think that one of the places where I quite diverge from some of my other friends on this is that I think when you create this level of proceduralism, this level of veto points, they get captured by interests over time. And that is a place where power can pool. Now, I think the place where I probably part, just to finish the thought, I think the place where I probably part is that I think that the left is often very attentive to power when it is coming from certain recognized villains, and much less attentive to power when it is coming from people who might in other contexts look like allies or just be local homeowners. But that can also be real power wielded in a problematic way.
Well, but you listed off three entities that have power: corporate power, moneyed interests, and homeowners. And I would suggest to you that in all three of those that you just listed, that money is ultimately the controlling factor. So for instance, I can tell you, like, I don't know San Francisco, I don't know Austin, I know Worcester, Mass. And I can tell you that during urban renewal, we had, there was an entire neighborhood that was completely, I don't know if you've ever been to Worcester, had gone through 290. There was an entire neighborhood called Laurel Clayton, I think it was, that ended up dumping people into a housing project, Plumley Village. And it was all run by the Worcester Redevelopment Authority. It was completely streamlined. None of the other, what we would call today groups. There was no equity involved in this, or equitable justice or anything like this. And the neighborhood was completely destroyed because the input only essentially came from this big insurance company and the Worcester Redevelopment Authority, which was essentially owned by the same type of people. And I only know about this because a buddy of mine was homeless in high school because of how much destruction generationally it had created as a result of that. And so when you list off those three elements of power, in my mind, those are all moneyed interests. Those local homeowners, I'm sure there are stories of low-income people who own homes in an area that hasn't been redeveloped stops, is able to stop building. But I would imagine those are very far and few between.
Then I think we should be in agreement, right? If this is the case you're making, then I think we should be in agreement, because there's no doubt that
I'm saying it's moneyed interest.
It's sometimes money interest for sure, right?
Well, what is it other times?
Let me finish the thought. Okay. And then
I can already kind of see what's happening here without knowing. Obviously, like, American housing policy is not my specialty by any means, but I can already see what's happening here in the sense that Sam Seder probably agrees with this guy a lot more than he thinks he does, but there's already been a kind of like negative storm around Ezra Klein because he's not like because he's basically he's not just saying tax the rich are too powerful, fuck the rich, like fuck the billionaires. Like, he's probably offering a few more nuanced and like pragmatic reasons and solutions to the issues than these guys would like. And I imagine like they've built up like a whole storm around him over basically nothing. And Sam just like, he can't cede ground to this person now, really, like, not because the guy's not left enough.
Give me your rebuttal. When you create these highly legalistic systems, the people with the money to hire lawyers and lobbyists are going to be more capable within them. And so the structure of a society that begins to bury so much in bureaucracy, where you have to know when to show up to the planning meeting and you have to know who the city council members are, like, it begins to structurally favor those who can navigate that society. So when we talk about things like upzoning, where we want to make it possible to build more houses in an area, like, everybody knows it is almost impossible to upzone a rich area. And that is because they are able to bend this process to their will. Now, you can take a place like California,
all right? Well,
right?
let me address that. I mean, I get that point there. And I think that is what worries, I don't know about other people, but that's the type of thing that worries me, because the argument you've just made is almost identical to the one that I would have every week with Tim Carney, who I know, back in the day, which is an idea that the problem with wealthy influence, and if you and I agree, then it is money. The problem with
we don't agree that it's all money.
Okay,
money is one mechanism of influence.
But I think it is the biggest one. Would you agree with that?
Uh-oh.
It depends on the issue.
Contention.
So look, there are a bunch of these issues. Where
okay, well, let me finish my
fight.
point about Tim Carney. He would say that you need to have less government. That way it cannot be as corrupted or manipulated by moneyed interest. Now, I don't know if you think that money is the problem 51% of the time or 30% of the time.
I don't think categorically asking that question is, but here, let me say where I disagree with Tim Carney, because maybe it'll clarify where maybe you and I don't agree. Tim wants a less capable state. I want a more capable state. Tim wants a state that does fewer things. I want a state capable of doing more things, including the things it has already promised to do. So when I look at California high-speed rail, I work backwards and I say, what the fuck happened that the state of California could not build high-speed rail, which they can do in Japan, they can do in China, they can do in Europe? Tim looks at it and says, they shouldn't be trying to build high-speed rail. And so the disagreement I have with Doge, with a lot of different things, with a lot of my friends on the right, is they want to reduce state capacity. I come at this as a liberal who wants the state to accomplish very difficult things: decarbonizing the economy, building enough affordable housing, including, by the way, public housing, building mass public infrastructure, things like high-speed rail or the Big Dig or the Second Avenue subway here in New York City. And what I see is a state failing to accomplish its goals.
Right.
Now, they would say, don't fucking try. I would say, fix the state. And one issue with the state is that it has become so highly regulated, not in terms, I find that when I use the term deregulation, like, people's brains turn off, because they think of deregulation as something that the state does for the market. But no player is more highly regulated than the state itself, often by Republicans, often because of power in the way that you would define it. But I think a lot of liberals, a lot of leftists have, one, and this is my critique going backwards, ceased to see this, but two, they don't take state failure seriously. And when something like California high-speed rail happens, or rural broadband, they sort of move on instead of saying, why are we not delivering? We are the people who believe in government. People are pissed at government for a reason. How do we make government deliver?
See, and I think and I think in terms of results, I think you and I are largely aligned. But I think the problem is, and you bring up Doge, and it's ironic that you and Carney will approach it in a very similar way, but anticipate different outcomes. But that being aside, I mean, I think that is where, people get a little bit
But see, I don't think we're approaching it similarly. I think it's at a level of abstraction, it's similar, and then you go granular and it's not at all.
But see, this is what we're talking about. See, like, it's their policy and politics are in the same place. So we have a level of abstraction, we have a level of granular, right? And the point is the way that these two commingle, I think, becomes problematic, where these two things meet, because your identification of the primary problem, right? I mean, this is the point. Like you don't address moneyed interest per se in the book. The primary problem is, I mean, if you just do a summary of the book, primary problem has to do more with the regulation and the handcuffing the state has done of itself. But the state doesn't do it itself. Like, all of this handcuffing comes from a place, and it's either moneyed interest or it's not. And I have no doubt that at different times.
This is where I think you've really oversimplified politics.
Oh,
I want to try to find the right example.
That phrase was very, absolutist, but okay.
I think if we stay high, we just are like yelling about this abstract question of money. But let's talk. We both believe in decarbonization.
I think that's really grounded, though.
Hold on, but let's talk about it from this perspective. We both believe in decarbonization, right? Climate change is a problem.
Yes.
And we sort of see the pathway on that is we have to build a lot of green energy to reorient our economy so you can run a modern economy on a green energy basis. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So to do that, you have to move all this energy production over to renewable sources, and then you have to get the energy from where it currently is, right? A solar farm, a wind farm, a hydroelectric, project, whatever it is, and run it through transmission lines to where we plug shit into the wall and charge it. I have done a lot of coverage of this failure point because we are, to be perfectly clear about this, failing to build enough transmission lines. There is no world in which our decarbonization strategy works if we cannot increase by orders of magnitude how fast we are building transmission lines. There is money trying to build transmission lines. There is money trying to slow down the building of transmission lines. Just walking into this process and saying, where's the money, doesn't get you anywhere. Like, I have talked to the private equity figures trying to get a transmission line built. I have also talked to the green, new dealers trying to get that same transmission line built. And I've also seen the people standing in the way of it who have all their reasonable and good arguments. I don't find, when I dig into these things, that the way I can just repeatedly sort politics is, well, like, over here there's the money and the money is bad, and over here there is the not money and the not money is good. Usually there's money on both sides of it. There are sometimes unions on both sides of it. And so the structure of the book, because I hope people come from this and want to read it, the structure of the book is typically working backwards from a problem. We're not building enough housing. If we go granular on that, what can we learn? We're not building enough transmission lines. If we go granular, what can we learn? And I just don't think abstracting out to money tied the state's hands, if money could untie the state's hands on a lot of big building projects, all these fucking developers would do it.
Well,
but it can't because the proceduralism takes on a life of its own.
I follow what you're saying, that in each case, there are specifics that are different, and you cannot generalize. It sounds like what you're saying.
You can generalize some, but you have to take seriously the specific issues in each case.
I have no doubt.
Your generality should emerge out of the granularity.
Okay. What are the generalities? Like, this is what I guess what I'm asking.
I am saying the default in America has become that building, particularly when the state is involved, has become too slow and expensive. We have created an architecture of policy that makes it too hard for us to achieve our goals in the real world, and for that matter, in social insurance. Say it again.
Who's the we?
It depends. You're not going to like it. Look, here's a version of the
well, but I'm
right?
trying to address the point because, for instance, okay, so
let me give you a better answer to who's the we.
Well, but why I think this is important though is because this to me is the central question, really, about the book. Because I think like I could say there's some things in it I like, there's some things that I don't like, but the general point is I think, for instance, like where does the title abundance come from?
From Derek's piece on abundance.
Okay, we have seen an entire movement build up about abundance, correct? I mean, like there is a lot of money behind this broad notion of abundance. And Derek, I think it was on the Lex Friedman podcast, said something to the effect of, there is a fight within the Democratic Party. I don't think he used the word for the soul of the Democratic Party, but for where we're going as a political, as a political movement. And folks from the Nicholson Center have said, like, we have identified the Democratic Party as the best place to have this abundance agenda. And so as a political matter, they're not talking about, in that instance in the Nicholson, they're not saying like in San Francisco, we need to roll back this specific policy. This is attempting to develop a movement.
Well, I want to answer for myself here, not for Niskanen, right? So my first piece that leads
you were on that Lex Friedman podcast. I mean, that's
people should go listen to it. I stand by everything I said on the Lex Friedman podcast. But Derek, I believe I'd have to go back and look at what section you're quoting from. But Derek is responding to a lot of very heated left criticism of the book, which, to be honest, neither of us were expecting. The way I wrote at least my parts of the book, to me, are extremely compatible with virtually and frankly necessary for all left goals. It's a book about affordable housing, decarbonization, state capacity. And my initial piece that leads to this book is in, I believe, 2021. And it is building off of the fact that the Biden administration is trying to do decarbonization through building a lot. And as I begin to follow that policy project, I begin to realize we're not going to get it done under these laws. So that's, I think, one very important thing. But I want to go back to what you asked a minute ago, which is who's we? In this book, we is Democrats. This book is very focused for a very particular reason that we can talk about, because not that the only problems in governance come from the left. They don't. My first book was all about largely about the right and polarization and asymmetric polarization. But I became very interested, having moved back to California in 2018, in why is this state?
Okay, the question I have here is there any fucking use in switching to survival guide at level 40? Because I do have lots of means of escape and survival now. I could just speedrun all the way to the end. And it looks like switching to survival guide literally just puts me a few zones behind because I haven't done dungeons. So it's probably just going to send me to quests I've already done if I go to level 40. Arathi, like that's miles away from where I am. So I should probably just stick to where I am, unless I end up overlapping in the same place at one point. Survival is better. Yeah, but if I change to survival, I'm going to have to go to a completely different location. Maybe I'll do it when I'm between zones. We'll see. See if it's possible.
Governed by all these Democrats doing so badly. Why is it unaffordable? Why is it building less clean energy than Texas? Why is it not building enough housing? And part of the motivation for doing this book is there are a lot of problems Republicans, I mean, we're living through them right now. There are a lot of problems Republicans impose on the political system.
Okay.
But there's a sort of rigor and confrontation that I think is demanded when you look at the states where the people who, broadly speaking, agree with you are in power, and it's not working the way you want it to. You're not getting the outcomes you want to get. And so one story this book is telling is about a collision of the New Deal left.
Whenever I hear people talk about housing in the United States, I usually hear, like, there's a few arguments I hear. One is obviously rent control. People talk about that, even though I don't think rent control has a particularly high success rate, unless it... I only read like one study about this about 3 years ago, so I don't remember what it... But I think the gist I took from it, and maybe I'm wrong, is that rent control seemed to do well when people are building a shitload of houses anyway. So it's like, is rent control really responsible for that, or is it because people are building more houses? Otherwise, what I tend to hear about the United States, so rent control is one argument. The other argument I always hear about is zoning. Because zoning, which is basically like it maps out like different jurisdictions and limits and controls the amount of building and the amount of purchasing that can be done in that area. And that is often blamed for why it's really hard for developers to build houses that are affordable in particular places. But I don't know why that's the case, because obviously if it's about money, wouldn't you want to allow developers to build in a deregulated environment? And is the problem with that to do with like NIMBYs who just don't want to see fucking high rises in their neighborhoods because everything in America is so spread out and like suburban and fucking like a massive waste of space for living, which just naturally makes everything very expensive because the houses are big and you need to have a fucking car and a lawnmower and all this stupid you need to fill your house with shit. It's all about NIMBYs. But NIMBYs that's like a local power thing then. That's not money power, is it? That would be like, so is zoning, is that... Okay, I just need to get a few basic questions. I think chat will mostly know these. I'm guessing zoning is like a state thing, right? Or like a local thing. Or is it federal? Like, I know the federal government does own land and property, but zoning laws are local. Okay. So is that the reason like a blue state might still be fucked for housing because the zoning would be dictated by... It would just depend on how much power like people have at a local level to reject planning for big buildings and stuff like that, or like big affordable houses. Okay, so that's maybe why Sam's the rich narrative is maybe a bit more confusing, because it's again you can even do this from a leftist perspective, because if you look at Karl Marx, you know, the whole argument is that capitalists are not unified, they're a band of hostile brothers, he calls them. So a band of hostile brothers in this case is divided into people who, fuck me, am I gonna die? Oh my god! Okay, we're fine. Because in this case, the band of hostile brothers are the developers who would probably like to build high rises and have affordable housing available in a place because they want to build, they want their projects to go through. It would be lucrative because there's going to be demand for housing. And then there's the NIMBYs, who are the other, like, I guess, kind of rich people who are saying, no, we don't want those dastardly blocks. So in that case, it's a question of like which wealthy people do you support? Do you happen to have the same interests as? Do you have the interests of the developers, or do you want to go for the interests of the fucking NIMBYs? Not in my box yard, Drew. Is that the argument? I feel like that's what I've absorbed just from listening to conversations about housing just kind of passively over the years in America. In the UK, it's different, I think. In the UK, we just need to build the fuck out of more houses. That's it. We just need to build more houses. We actually have quite good things in place in terms of tenants' rights and things like that. And obviously, we have quite a strong local activist presence when it comes to living rent campaign and tenants' rights unions and things like that. The problem is just that governments, every single time, they promise to build a shitload of houses and they never do. They always fall under their targets. The last time I think the government met a target for housing was in like 2006, like under Blair and Brown. What might stop us in the not too distant future would be the fact that Keir Starmer wants to massively limit immigration, even though immigrants make up a lot of construction workers. It's often like a lot of Poles who are involved in that. So that's roughly where I am with this conversation, unless anything changes. Immigrants do not make up a lot of construction workers in the UK. Are you sure? Am I thinking about America? In America, they're like a third. Might be wrong. Might have got those mixed up.
Which is very, very focused on growth and building, and in many ways is very reckless with that, right? You were talking about Worcester, Massachusetts, which sounds to me like it's a story from that era. But we could give, Robert Moses is a classic story of this. We can
okay, so in 2020, the proportion of non-UK workers in construction was 13.4%. At least according to AI Overview. Compared to the general populations, that's maybe about represented. In London, 54% of construction workers are migrants, despite them making 9% of the workforce in total. So... okay. Maybe it just depends on cities and areas. Damn, London.
Talk about, we really do despoil like environments and poison streams, and we, run highways through marginalized communities and all the things people know. And in response to that, again, correctly, a new left arises. Ralph Nader, Rachel Carson, the entire environmental movement. And it passes all kinds of bills that are very, very, very effective and consequential in their day to restrain government's ability to act recklessly and to do things without considering and creating space for consideration of their impacts. So you have things like the National Environmental Policy Act and all these, bills and projects of that era. And then in this fucking maddening historical moment we're in, the problem becomes not that we're building too much, but we're building too little. And particularly building too little in the places where that new left was most powerful, California, New York, places like that. And so this is a confrontation with having created a very successful architecture to challenge, restrain, and sue the government that is now being used against liberal or leftist, for that matter, projects. If you would like the government to do public housing, say you think I'm a neo-shitlib, and you just want the government to do the public housing, great. I would like to see a lot more public housing too. The government cannot currently do public housing under the regulatory structure under which it operates. And yes, some of that is money. But it's also the fact that you can sue to stop all this stuff under the National Environmental Policy Act. It's also the fact that government, what I call everything bagel liberalism, loads huge amounts of standards and projects and goals into everything that public money touches. So in California, it costs about 2.2x per square foot to build housing as it does in Texas. Fine, market rate housing, 2x per square foot.
Whoa.
If you are doing affordable housing subsidized by the government, it's more than 4x. So why are we making the government's housing for the poorest people so much harder, slower, and more costly to build? And is that in the long run good for our goals? I think it is important to confront why government, in the place where people agree with us more than in the places where they don't, is not getting the outcomes we both want to see it achieve. That's what the book is about.
And I don't know how much public housing is in Texas, or how much public housing is in Texas, or if we're, and that seems to me to be a relevant question. But the notion of the everything bagel liberalism, this is the idea that we have
Israelis and South Africans. I think that as a half Lebanese Brit, you really don't want to enter this discussion. JK, love the great work you do.
Thanks for the 60 shekels. Yeah, but in Lebanon, apartheid is acceptable, or we just don't talk about it because brown, right? No one gives a fuck about our apartheid system. And if we do, we just blame it on America. Simple.
Constraints on federal money that a certain amount of union workers or
housing is the ultimate litmus test to weed out ideologues across any country. It's a problem whose solution is to simply write policy that allows more houses be built. Inserting any other pet issue should ring alarms.
Wow, thanks for £20. That sounds completely reasonable to me. Let's go.
Health warning.
But again, I'm fairly low conviction on most of this just because I don't know too extensively about the housing thing. It just sounds like I'm obviously going to lean more into the person who's actually proposing solutions rather than just trying to focus on one problem that you can kind of tell they were always going to. Yeah, well,
there may be a certain amount of equity associated with it, and at one point in
contracting and procurement or a million other things, right?
And certainly, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that we could go through these bills and find things that are problematic if they are coming necessarily from. I have two. There's two issues. One is. There was one point in the book where you talked about we have a choice whether we're going to put filters into apartments that are built, public housing built near highways, or the people are going to live under the highway. And it seems to me that there's got to be a third choice, as opposed to we're going to poison people slowly or we're going to keep them unhoused.
So I want to say specifically what you're talking about, that section. So I'm talking to Jasmine Tong, who's an affordable housing developer, does nonprofit affordable housing. And what she is saying is that compared to market rate housing, when she is building housing for homeless people, she is subject to environmental, green building standards, et cetera, that are so far beyond what market rate housing has to do that it often makes it impossible to finance the thing entirely. And a lot of these projects, as you both know, fall apart. And I am saying there that it makes a lot of sense. You understand how people get into a conversation that we should have better than average air filtration systems in, affordable housing built near a freeway. But in a city where you are not building enough affordable housing at all, because again, you have layered not just that, but a million of these onto every individual project. So again, it's costing much more per square foot than market rate housing. At some point, you have to begin to choose.
Most public housing is built near the highway. Why is that?
Say again?
Most public housing, some huge percentage of public housing is built near highways.
We're not even talking, yes, that's all. I mean, listen, we're in agreement that that's all power. But when we are talking, I am saying that we are not building enough affordable housing affordably in California.
Why are we addressing that far downstream the issue when we're completely eliding the issue that is upstream from that,
we're not completely eliding the issue. The whole fucking book, man, is about wrecking these zoning codes that allow rich people to keep it out of their areas. Okay, but if you can't build it in the first place because you can't make it affordable to build, which the people who build it will tell you, I think that I've actually found this set of arguments I've had in this really productive in a way. I don't disagree with you about power, but every time we talk about it specifically, like, yeah, that's a problem. But no, we actually have to solve the problem. Like, if you want to make housing development by right, which I think you should do, so that rich communities can't stop it, and the affordable, like, I live on a block with public housing right now. I believe there should be public housing mixed in everywhere, but you can't build it if you cannot affordably build it. If you're going to, in Chicago, the mayor of Chicago sent out this tweet and he said, hey, look at all we're doing. We built 10,000 units of affordable housing for $11 billion. People are like, you did fucking what? Like, whatever it was, it came to $1.1 million per unit. If we're going to...
Hello, Brandon Eisenberg. Have you watched any of Sam's show? Dude's incredibly knowledgeable. Y'all keep telling yourselves. He might be. Hearing him talk about Israel-Palestine with Ethan Klein was one of the most black-pilling experiences, because despite talking about the conflict for like 20 months now, quite extensively in his show, Sam was so riddled with gaps in his knowledge. The way he spoke about the March of Return was fucking batshit. He was so surprised to hear that, like, really, for the first dozen weeks of protests, like, there was Hamas presence. Like, yeah, of course there fucking was. Hamas said so themselves. Yeah, that was mental. And he also just seemed like, I guarantee you, he just didn't know that Mandela was nothing like Hamas. So the way he was talking about that, and the way he skirted away so fast, like, he had no idea that the ANC avoided civilian casualties to such an extreme degree compared to anything Hamas did, even like across 20 years. But,
Health warning.
But maybe that's just his weakness, even though he spoke about it with quite a degree of confidence.
Costs $1.1 million per unit. When the government builds housing for poor people, we can't build enough of it. It doesn't matter where you're building it.
I mean, I think even if I stipulate that it is exclusively zoning requirements or the everything bagel,
but it sounds like Sam isn't convinced by his own arguments. Maybe he's too audience captured, or he just doesn't know as much about this subject as he pretends to. Or maybe it's just my autism.
I don't know about audience capture because I don't know him well enough, but he does just seem to be like only interested in taking the like stock far leftist take on like everything now, which is a bit weird. Who knows?
Liberalism that is creating the barrier to build, housing. We can look at the CHIPS Act, and that was also something that had everything bagel liberalism built into it, which apparently, as far as I can tell, up until Donald Trump shows up, was quite effective. The timeline of things, definitely, of course.
Hold. They went back and answered one of my critiques on the CHIPS Act. If you go back to that original piece, one of the things I'm saying is that they've loaded a lot into this bill, but taken nothing away. After that piece comes out, President Joe Biden signs a bill from Ted Cruz and Mark Kelly exempting the CHIPS Act from environmental review under the theory, as the administration says, that we cannot allow this to be delayed for years and years under environmental review. You could think that's bad or good, but if you want to say the CHIPS Act is going smoothly and well, it's in part because they took the critique.
Well, I think there are instances, and you talk about I-95, for instance, what Shapiro was able to do.
Pennsylvania.
the idea that, and my argument is, without that equity, you do get people living in apartments that are going to slowly kill them or give them asthma or higher asthma rates. Without that equity, you are going to destroy a neighborhood, and like we saw it in Worcester, and like with generational impact. But I also think, as a political matter, it is extremely difficult, unless there is some type of buy-in from everybody, that there are circumstances that qualify as an emergency or an urgency that give you the political ability to do something like this. So, for instance, in the I-95 thing, you cite that as an example of where this type of like power, sort of centralized power to bypass this stuff, is effective, and it was very effective in that moment. But if you contemplate like the constituents and constituencies who would be for it versus against it, there may be people who are like, I got a store on Route 1, and if 95, that bridge is down, I'm going to make a lot of money because people are going to drive by. But outside of that, there was an alignment where in the fact that you could essentially bypass these things in a state of an emergency. There was the political will to do that. There was the political will to do that in the context of the CHIPS Act. And to revitalize industrialization, you had buy-in.
Ruined here, right?
And on some level, it feels like some of what you're talking about with the jettisoning of the everything bagel liberalism, maybe it's like it's not what you're talking about. Jettisoning is not the poppy seeds or the garlic or whatever it is on top, but it's like maybe the salt inside, or the dough.
Well, you have to be very connected to what you're trying to achieve. Like, I guess I would turn this question on you, because I feel like we want to be, as you were saying earlier, upstream. Do you think we can build enough affordable housing if the units cost $650,000 to $1 million to complete per unit? Just flat. Like, can we pay for that?
I would imagine not, depending on the locality.
So what should we do then? Like, what is your view of what is pushed? It doesn't cost that much to build market rate housing. So what is your view? If when you trigger government money, you often double the per square foot cost in some cases of the housing it builds, or when you trigger government money, they don't get things like high-speed rail done. Like, all I want to do here, man, I'm not here for like a big like left liberal moderate fight. I actually want the government to deliver things I think we both want it to deliver. I don't want it to give people asthma, but I need it to be able to build housing, because homelessness is a fucking problem, and it is the worst problem for the people experiencing it, not for me. So what is your theory of how you get this cost of construction down, the speed up? There's got to be something here.
Well, it's obviously localized, right? I mean, I have a sense of, like, in New York, how it could be cheaper.
Okay, let's do New York.
We do not allow developers to sit on land and wait for the market to catch up to them. We do not allow homes to sit unoccupied without it being a cost on those people. I mean, there is a lot of excess housing and space in the city that is being held in private hands,
okay,
so
great.
that they can maximize their profits.
Let's say we do all that, but we're talking here very specifically. The New York City is going to have to build housing that is affordable. We know, like, there are studies on this. You can read them. You can go talk to developers. Like, the reporting on this is like very straightforward. We know that when you trigger the public rules, it ends up being extremely, extremely expensive. We know that, like in San Francisco, where they would try to build a public toilet for almost $2 million, they do that here too. Why does it cost so much, and why does it so often fail when government tries to achieve the things we both want it to do?
I think property has been so commodified that there is such a profit incentive, such a money incentive to slow that roll, that it creates a whole litany there's an everything.
We're talking about
there's an everything bagel.
We're talking about projects that are past that point. Like I think that let me be really meta clear here on what I'm trying to do.
Meta clear.
Because I think you keep wanting to pull it back to where we can. Let's totally premise. Corporations are terrible. They are bad. They're like they are your enemy. Hold on.
They have their
cases,
agenda,
sure,
and we have ours.
Yes, there are cases where the government is building affordable housing on land they own or they have already bought, or they are funding somebody else to build it that is already nonprofit housing. This is just like, it's not being done for profit. We are not in a commodified system. We know that housing costs more than the commodified housing costs to build. It is fine to say that it costs more. This is a totally reasonable interpretation. That is because wealthy landowners and wealthy corporations have colluded, maybe with other figures, on rules that have made it cost more. But which of these are you going to pull apart, right? This is the trade-offs that we are trying to force people to confront in abundance. You have to go into this thing and say, this is not working. I need to make it cheaper, faster, more achievable. Like, when you can't make the corporation your villain, what are you doing? Like, how do you approach?
Well, is that a question of making the? Well, first off, I think as a political matter, making the corporations a villain is going to be far more. You're going to have a far broader support than making, environmental groups or people seeking equity in housing the villain.
That's fine, but
okay. But then I would say
the actual problem here.
Well, and then I would say the problem again is that we have so greatly commodified housing. There is such a profit incentive to create these barriers. I know how they exist today. But the idea of unwinding it, you're just like, the whole book is about the idea that what was good intention 25 years ago, 40 years ago, has now brought us this problem. It seems to me that there's an attempt to restart that cycle.
I don't think that you can say, I really want to push you here. I don't think you can say that the reason it costs more money and is so much more difficult and is so much slower to build nonprofit affordable housing than to build market rate housing is because we've over commodified housing. I just don't, or that Texas is better at building housing because they have somehow decommodified housing compared to California.
Well, they have more space. They simply have
plenty of space. If you go to
does California lack space? Obviously, Texas is fucking massive, but I don't know. Like, I haven't been to California, but being anywhere else in America, space is the last of this country's problems. But maybe California is different. I don't know.
San Jose, man, there is plenty of space. It's strip malls and single-family homes. It is one of the richest tracts of land in the whole country, in the whole world. It could be
That's the impression I get. It's like, but is that when you get space that's taken up by just fucking shit? Yeah, like you don't need that much space to build like an apartment block.
Skyscrapers, it could be Shenzhen. It is strip malls and single family homes. We have plenty of space in California.
I mean, I can't speak to San Jose.
Like Silicon Valley is what I'm talking about. Like you go ride around where these fucking venture capital firms, man, I promise you will not leave that drive saying there is nowhere to build a 6-story apartment building.
And
so Ezra Klein needs to think more like a debater here, because the point in bringing up space was that Sam said that it's easier to build housing in Texas than California because they have more space in Texas. So then Ezra said, well, space isn't really the issue in California, because if you look at these places like San Jose or whatever, then he needs to bring it back. So it's like, if the issue's not space, then what is it?
You have public transport there? Like, how are these
we would if we could build it. That was part of what high-speed rail was supposed to be doing, which is why I'm so rip shit that it didn't happen.
And whose tax base is going to pay for
and developers as the same type of class? One reaps undue appreciation from supply stagnation, one makes money from more supply. Lefties see money making and the analysis stops there.
Wow. What I got him, Callum Mack. Really appreciate the £20. Yeah, that's what I don't get with what Sam Seder is saying about like the commodification and everything, even though it seems like things that get in the way of property developers is like an issue here. I don't know. That's the bit I don't understand is gelling. Yeah, it's the band of hostile brothers. Woo.
For that public transport and those buildings there. I mean, that's
it was
the
our
point.
Tax base. I was one of the taxpayers.
I mean,
I am saying that I don't think it is plausible to say that the reason you can't build in like San Jose and you can in Texas is that we've decommodified in Texas. We just haven't.
Well, we have plenty. Of space in the desert too. But the point is how are we going to? I'm talking about the places where you guys specifically make the point that
Sam,
New York
how
City,
would solve gun violence in this country? Sam would say just tax the rich. He reminds me of how magtards will blame everything on wokeness or immigration. It's so boring who enjoys this guy.
Wow. Yeah, also, I don't really know if Texas house building is largely taking place in the desert. I could be wrong, but building housing in the fucking desert is really problematic for some very fucking obvious reasons. Like, I don't know if they're like doing it Middle Eastern style, like the Emirates, where they just build a 5-star hotel in the middle of the desert and you have to get there by a fucking camel ride. But I don't, is this really the common occurrence? Thanks to $10.
San Francisco, these places are, where people should be living and creating. And the
Phoenix is, yeah, but isn't Phoenix like a fucking disaster city? Phoenix, Arizona, isn't this the city that is like insanely fucking hot and it is built in the middle of a desert and it's actually like got huge problems because of that? Isn't that the case?
From my perspective in New York, having, lived here more or less for 30 some odd years, 35 years, this place got a lot more expensive, not because there were constraints on zoning, not because there was equity. There hasn't been like this place got more expensive.
I'm not again. I'm pro equity. I believe what I'm doing will create a whole lot more equity because you need to make the affordable housing. But in the book, if you've listened to it, I have a whole section critiquing Michael Bloomberg for this whole concept that New York City should be a luxury good. That this is like a whole section of the book that it is a incredible mistake that a lot of Democrats made along the way.
Fuck,
to sort of get into this idea that cities are like a penthouse for the upper class.
Yes, and I would suggest. I mean, look, there was a this just came out a report by the Fed, UCLA, that specifically addressed the question of whether it was housing constraints. California Federal Reserve researchers found that constrained housing supply is relatively.
Is he just like reading off of something that's been passed to him? Am I doing like fucking JCS here? It sounds like he's just reading something he's been shown for the first time in his life. What are we talking about here?
Unimportant in explaining the differences in rising house prices among U.S. cities.
Have you read the debate on this report?
Oh no, he knows the study.
I haven't. But it said higher income growth predicts the same growth. Okay, well, it's controversial. I mean, I'm willing to accept that. Like I say, I'm not a housing expert.
On some basic level, right? If you have enough, things fall as
Didn't last very long.
If you have enough of something, if you have too much of something, the price of it is going to fall. Right? They'll argue that higher incomes, because, and this again, like I think in a weird way we would agree on this.
Okay.
Higher incomes are going to be a causal factor in restrictive zoning and building policies because people get higher incomes, they buy a house, that house becomes a major asset for them. And again, this is all in the book. The way they can protect the value of that asset is by making it impossible for 100%. Other people to live in near them. They are creating their own scarcity. And so again, when I hear this book is not about power, to me, this book is all about power.
Well, but I still can't get an answer as to what is the primary. If we're talking from a national perspective, right? I mean, across the country, this is going to be a message. You just visited the Senate caucus to talk about this. Derek was talking about there's a fight. It's happening right now. Our book is trying to win a certain intra-left coalitional fight about defining the future of liberalism in the Democratic Party. I mean, if this fight's going on and this is part of a movement, there's a lot of money behind it. I can't remember the organization, you'd probably know, just dropped $120 million citing the abundance movement. There's a lot of money behind this. What is I know that there are granular problems in each of these different cities, but do you think if there is a villain, and I imagine that there's, a good movement always needs a villain, What is the villain? Is it just we have overly restrictive zoning, and
I think you and I probably actually disagree that good movements are built on clear villains. But let me try to give you a good answer to this question. We didn't think the intra-left argument was with you. Just to be really blunt about it, I thought the neo-Brandeisians, etc.
I don't know if I'm necessarily a neo-Brandeisian, but okay.
You may not be, but they've been very critical of it. We thought the intra-left argument had to do much more with a debate that is very live. Again, it's a sort of New Deal, New Left divide to us between is the right future organizing government to organize the resources of society to create this kind of plentitude of housing, of energy, of infrastructure, these things that we want, of innovation, which is a big part of the book? Or is it more of a small is beautiful future? Is it more degrowth inflected? Is it more that we actually build too much already? Is it that there isn't enough meaning in things? In a weird way, Donald Trump has begun to really embody this other side when he comes out and he says, maybe the kids have too many dolls, right? You got 30 dolls, maybe you only need 2. You got 30 pencils, maybe you only need 5. So our view was not that the sort of fight that was live here.
Wait, did a fucking snarker try to post me playing a song on fucking crappy music, r/crappy music? I don't know if you guys know this, but a while ago, Mr. Girl did this tune called "Would You Still Love Me If I Was a Pedophile?" And I did it like a little fucking acoustic cover of it because at the request of it was actually someone I was dating at the time, and the responses are, you can tell it's like all snarker shit. And there, I guess, people who are that this is clearly a joke. This is definitely a music subreddit. Fucking IDF shit. I hate when internet drama bleeds into neutral subs. And the OPs. Oh god, the desperation, bro. They love me. Fuck! Fucking axe throwers. Come on. All right.
Was with people who worry about corporate power. It's that if you come from the places I come from, or frankly that you live in now and I live in now, you see a lot of Democrats who show up at the planning meeting and don't want any affordable housing because they don't want it to change their housing values. Yeah, you see a lot of people using all sorts of tools of delay in all sorts of directions to stop things from happening. And
damn, I hope Mr. Girl gets his writing credit for that. I feel bad now. I did it in the tweet, obviously. I was like, this is not my song. This is Mr. Girl. But oh no. Fuck me.
Us, like, I think one of the really profound fights is, do you think delay as a omnipresent tool of governance is a virtue, or do you think speed is more of a virtue? And if you think speed is a virtue, as I do, I think we should deliver government services much faster. Then what sort of moves are you willing to make that true?
I'm confused. What? You were surprised that your fight your fight was with the neo-Brandeisians. Who did you think? Did you think the fight was like you talk?
Like there's a big schism in the environmental movement and the environmental community between the side that thinks we need to build our way towards decarbonization and the side that is much more about worrying that when we build things, we're going to...
You should post the original song in the replies. No, I'm good. Engaging directly with snarkers is kind of like they depend on it, you know? That would actually just be rewarding their behavior, so... No, I'll just use their behavior to entertain you guys. I'm not going to actually, like, go face-to-face with that shit.
Change environments, using things like the California Environmental Quality Act or the National Environmental Policy Act to stop things that might...
What would their movement... I'm trying to figure out who you're talking about. The degrowthers?
If you follow or report on any part of the decarbonization fight, you will find that the entire architecture of environmental policy we have is being mobilized against it in order to sue it out of existence, sometimes by moneyed interests. But there was a point in time when, like, a chapter of the Sunrise Movement, I think it was in Mass, signed on to a solar moratorium. There is a lot of conflict among people who see themselves as liberals committed to these goals, etc., on whether building is good or bad. I think that if you're looking very skeptically, but what do you think NIMBYs are?
Well, I think NIMBYs, for the most part, are wealthy people.
Great. That's a big part of the fight we thought we were about to have.
I mean, the Kennedys,
yes,
stop the windmills.
So now you're making my argument for me. Come on, do it. Give it to me here.
No. But when I look at the common strain through those people and their ability to actually impact policy, I see money.
Okay, but so you look at one strain, and I probably have a broader set. So let me say,
but it's a form of money power that comes into contention with other money power, right? Because if a developer wants to build like a high rise or something, like kind of any form of affordable housing, and then NIMBY says no, then this is money versus money, right? Only one thing that the money people want actually might help people, the other one doesn't. No? It's not that simple, is it? Why would Sam not be getting that if it was that simple? Like, what the fuck? And why is Ezra Klein not summarizing it in that way for him? Because I don't know. It's like the whole thing about how the only way you can get these guys to listen is to just out-woke them. So if you say something like, oh, well, according to Karl Marx, like capitalists are at odds with each other, So there are some capitalists who might want projects that could still benefit people in some way versus ones that would be completely useless, like NIMBYs. Gosh.
Let me give you one
broader than that.
Let me give you one where we will disagree.
Wait, what is broader than that? Because
it's not just the Kennedys. It's not just the people you're comfortable
I know it's not just the Kennedys, but I'm talking wherever those NIMBYs succeed.
Those bastards.
I am willing to bet that the relationship between how much money they have and the YIMBYs have, the NIMBYs far more often than not will have more money. I mean, this is like, I know the research on this. Like, when these are contested, there's no doubt in my mind that we have regulations but it's to protect people's assets. And
Cadillac, thanks to £5. My take about landlords and developers was vindicated in 15 minutes, LeMayo. Yeah, I mean, it seems really simple. I don't know. It seems quite simple, even though, at least just for this level of analysis. Obviously, if you're getting into debates about what kind of zoning laws need to and how they need to be changed in different states, and how environmental policies can affect it, and how local power can be attained at different municipalities, that's going to lead you into a whole different discussion. But this very simple thing about it's like money power versus the contention that money power actually is at odds with each other when it comes to housing. That's like a very surface level argument, I think. That's like a basic thing. I don't know. But it's being had at the top level, guys. Top level.
People who have assets versus people who don't have assets. And so that is I don't know how you generalize it more than that.
So I think on the NIMBY side, we largely agree, right? And so when I say that we thought there were different obvious sources of opposition, that was a big one. And again, as you know, there's a whole section of the book about how destructive it has been to turn housing into the central asset class and wealth engine for the middle to upper middle class, right? It's not true for the very wealthy, but that's a thing people know. But here's a place where we probably disagree. In California, where I'm more familiar with politics, the California Environmental Quality Act, which I think most people agree has overgrown its initial design and is being used to do things like try to stop UC Berkeley from expanding dormitoriums because more students are environmental nuisance. One thing that really defends it is that there's a coalition of unions that use CEQA to sue development in order to get unrelated labor standards concessions. And to me, that is a misuse of power. I am pro stronger labor standards. I am not pro radically expanding how much you can delay every single project in order to get concessions that were not in the initial architecture or vision of that bill. So yes, there is power. The NIMBYs are power, and the NIMBYs are related to money, but power is also misused by groups I feel more allied with. And that's one utility of focusing on blue states for me.
We had a union problem in the context of Medicare for all in that fight. Yep. I mean, there's I think you can find that across a ton of different issues, and you'll have unions on different sides of the same issue because they're
carpenters and builder trades are very different in California.
But I think we both agree that the net value of a strong union movement is a positive. And actually, like a lot of problems we have in terms of across the board are a function of the deunionization of the country. So there's no doubt, like we can find specific instances, and I sort of feel like that's, I think, part of what I have as a critique of the book. There are particular instances, but broadly speaking, when we're talking about coalitional politics, which is definitionally democratic politics, to move forward and to have power and to actually get things done, it seems to me you can't do it by diminishing the coalition.
So there we genuinely disagree.
Yes.
Like that is truly, like I always want to be very honest about points of disagreement. There are places where I think we are actually aligned, and here I think Democrats have become way over coalitional. And I think it is a huge problem that we are not delivering.
Which parts of the coalition do you think should be jettisoned?
I don't ever talk about in terms of jettisoning, because I don't think that's how coalitions work. I think they just change issue to issue. But I do not think we should have such a level of proceduralism that forces this many giveaways to this many interests in every process. And again, to use an example where I think we would probably be more aligned.
Can you be specific about the interests? Are there interests that go across the board? I mean, that's what I keep trying to get at, is that like everything is specific.
You keep trying. I think my virtue is specificity, and your critique of me is I'm overly specific. Mine of you is you're overly general.
I'm saying like you're specific about the granular instances, but you say we need to have less interests. And I want to know who those interests are that we need to have less of.
I want to have, let me go back to the Medicare example for a minute, because you brought that up and I think it's a good one. We passed Medicare, sent out those cards in a year. When the Biden administration did two things I think we both probably liked, which is prescription drug negotiations and limiting out-of-pocket lifetime caps, or having lifetime caps for out-of-pocket costs. It took them 3 to 4 years to move it through a regulatory process that we have expanded with things like notice and comment periods and more opportunities for judicial review that can be utilized by, in this case, pharmaceutical companies, but others as well, to kind of slow everything down and force a lot of concession. I want to break that process and make it much more under agency discretion, what they do, and make it harder to challenge. In that case, that's going to hurt pharmaceutical companies, right? So I think that you and I would like it. In the California housing case, I want to make housing construction much closer to by right? I want you to have the right to build the housing you want to build, assuming it conforms to basic standards. This is what we've done in California for ADUs. It worked really, really well. A lot of people will be mad about that. NIMBYs, certain unions, etc. I would like to make it easier to build modular housing. Again, different people will be mad at that. I don't have one answer for you on who I'm trying to screw over, because I'm not trying to screw anybody over.
I think you could sell Americans on modular housing. I have a feeling Americans would have a very low opinion of modular housing, but fuck, I guess the more you need housing, then maybe that's different.
What I'm trying to do is focus liberal governance on the outcomes it is promising people and get people to confront why we are failing to deliver them. If you end up with a different answer than me, that's great. But that should be a very granular confrontation with why high-speed rail didn't happen, why the Second Avenue subway is so fucking expensive, why we're not building enough housing. I don't believe you can do this in generalities in the way that I think a lot of people want to. I think that it requires a lot of confrontation with the individual failures we see, and then trying to figure out, okay, do things rhyme across these failures? Is there a level of government that should have the authority that currently does it? That kind of thing.
All right, I've held you.
AG, thanks for the £5. Lonerbox, the UK has no rule-based zoning. Also, builders don't want to build high density because the margins are way lower than luxury homes. Yeah. So what's the solution to that? Is it? I know that with the government, they always just say we're going to build more government-built houses, like more council houses, even though that's obviously got its problems. It's very expensive for government to build houses, but I don't know. Would the solution to that not just be like some kind of incentives for building affordable housing? Do we already? Surely that's like a very obvious thing to do. It costs 450k per unit in London. Yeah, bro, that's wild. Migrant slave labor? I don't know. Fuck. Let's just go full fucking Gulf state.
Really long, and so I want to. But let me just.
Yeah.
So, what is then the political? Like, what do we organize around as a political movement? If it is in these various instances, people are going to get situationally marginalized in the process, right? I mean, or however gently you want to say. Your interests here, we're going to ignore in these specific cases. What is the political message that's going to resonate and get these different factions of the Democratic Party on board with this as a broad message?
I think every national politician who succeeds tends to be reformist and highly critical of the era of their party that came right before them. Bill Clinton was very critical of the Democratic Party preceding him, sort of New Democrat, etc. Barack Obama was extremely critical of both the way money acted in politics prior to him. You might disagree about his actual administration, and then the Iraq War. Donald Trump was extremely critical of the pre-Donald Trump Republican Party. I think being honest with people that you have noticed the same failures on your side that they have is a very potent politics. Now, I am not a politician. I don't have to win elections. I have a freedom to say things that I think are true, that maybe Pete Buttigieg and Wes Moore and Gretchen Whitmer and whoever don't. So I don't necessarily come here telling you I know how to win elections. I don't think you should believe me or really anybody else who doesn't routinely win elections if they tell you that. But the idea that
that's what Israel does. There are programs to incentivize builders to take on rebuilding projects to enlarge, strengthen, and renew multi-story buildings. Doesn't Israel have a pretty bad rent crisis as well, though? Isn't it really expensive to live in Israel right now in proportion to their income? Or are you just talking about a way that they're trying to solve the problem?
Pointing out, yeah, we fucked up. Yeah, things are moving too slow. Yeah, you don't feel the government is spending your money well. I thought it was incredibly telling that when the New York Times polled this just a couple weeks ago, what you found when you polled people, like, is government inefficient? Plus 18. Is Doge a good idea? Plus 6.
Wow.
Is Doge doing a good job? Minus some significant number. Is Elon Musk doing a good job? Like minus 18 or 20. People believe, often correctly, that government doesn't deliver for them, that it's not spending their money well, that they're not getting what they want out of it. And I think going to them in the first order and saying, yeah, I am going to be relentlessly focused on making sure the roads I promised to fix for you actually get fucking fixed this time. We are actually going to build. We learned something about California high-speed rail, and the next time we do one of these big projects, here's what we learned, and here's how we are going to make it work. Look, I could be wrong. I think it's a potent politics.
Which of the three Democratic presidencies that we've lived under would you rate the highest in terms of your policy set, in terms of accomplishing it?
Obama, but there's things you need to learn from that one too.
And that's a function of the ACA?
A function of the ACA, I mean, I think they got a lot done that was very valuable, but I will always say that part of my thinking goes back to that era, because you go back to the 2009 stimulus bill, and what does it promise? Whether it's big headline projects.
Growth in smaller towns. Canada's current issue is only having 2 major cities.
I've heard people talk about renting in places like Toronto, and I'm just like, that just sounds horrible. It sounds like the worst experience, just because of how costly it is. But I also live in a country where rent is pretty chill. Like, Scotland is decent for rent, so I have it way too good, really. Fuck! Where are these fucking trolls? They all gone. They all dead. Did I actually slaughter the entire fucking tribe? Here we go.
That are going to be the reinvestment side.
Good.
It's high-speed rail. It's a national set of interoperable health records, and it's a national smart grid, and we are over 3.
I would also argue they screwed up on the housing.
Don't you come to Scotland unless you're going to come as a construction worker, okay? And with and the only luggage you bring is bricks to build more houses, because I don't want you guys inflating my shit. Fuck off. Get out of me country. Twat.
Crisis immensely, and under Obama we lost 1,000 statewide Democrats, which is why I think we had such a poor bench over in the following 10 years. Some comptroller loses their job because of the wave. I'm not convinced that we didn't get Trump as a function of Obama.
I think a full debate between us on Obama should wait for another day.
That would be a different day. But Ezra, I really appreciate you taking the time, and we will link to Abundance and, of course, your podcast, huge podcast, and the New York Times is also a well-known newspaper.
I've heard of it. Yeah, a strong Northeast regional. Thank you, Sam. I enjoyed it.
All right, thanks, Ezra.
I feel really bad for that. Just wasn't. And there was how much fucking vitriol came off of that debate. It just seemed like, so Sam Seder just seemed like he was really, really, really prying to try and just make that into a single issue problem or single issue solution, even though you're talking about two different groups that have monetary interests and power that have different goals. Like one is developers, one is NIMBYs. So silly. Well, obviously the snark fucking attack is like, yeah, Sam Seder fucking destroyed Ezra Klein, neo-lib. Fuck. Very silly.
Health warning.
Yeah, people are quite toxic. People are quite toxic on the internet. I don't know if you guys noticed. They're toxic, they're stupid, they're mental. They're clearly hurting inside. There's a lot of pain. Health warning.